QuarterMaster has been sort of a long evolutionary process for me for trying to find different ways to, I guess, publish information that's of interest to me. And at the same time, I'd like to try and make it generally useful to other people that would like to publish information or just find different ways to make developing websites easier, I guess, directly. So QuarterMaster is a web framework based on the model view controller, but the idea is that any request comes in arbitrated by the controller, which can consult the model, go through the view, and produce a nice response. The essence of QuarterMaster is all about language. The idea that you start off with little additions to the language that help recognize patterns that you face when you are developing the typical website. Things like validating data input that can come from just about anywhere. So there's a lot of small parts that I've developed, and then there's further layers on top of those small parts that just try and hopefully kind of boil down all those complex things that you end up dealing with. So I have the first example is there's just this as function that I started, which will take, I mean, most of the text you'll get on the web is strings, so you want to try and make sense of those. The first one I came up with as, and there's probably better words to use, but as just takes a string, tries to recognize what's in the string, and will convert it either to the desired data type that you provide, or it'll say, no, this isn't good, this isn't what we want. I take this function and add it to another function that validates maybe a collection of values, say from a web form. As you can see, it's a dialect that will recognize any words in the form, try and convert it to the type that's there, and you can also sort of do checks on the data to make sure that it all conforms. But the idea is, I mean, it would try and recognize every name value in there, and if it doesn't conform, then it will fail. It will report every single type of failure that you might have on that data, and if you were to use the validate function by itself, you can have a report too, so place those values in an error object. So you get the number 8, which it recognizes is an integer, so it doesn't respond that the number is not a number, but it is not less than 5, so we do get feedback on why the data didn't validate. This in turn actually goes into the models, which sort of loosely map to database tables, so you can actually sort of build forms that loosely match the records you want to have, and it'll try and put that into the database if it works, otherwise it doesn't try. The second little dialect that I have is the match dialect, which will take a block with ad hoc values and try and make it conform to a certain specification. So it goes through each rule in turn. So it goes through 1, it'll try and find an integer. So you get the 1 integer and it picks it up, it's the 1 there. 2 will look for the word 2, and if it's there, it will set 2 here. I think the rest is self-explanatory, but if you use sum or any, it will return a block of values, and it will either be empty if it's any, if it doesn't match. And I use this largely when you're producing views. The first example here is you provide just a URL. So a URL is the only one that's actually required is the href, which is a file URL, and the first one matches, you have the URL, so it sets the URL. The other 2 set to none. But you can sort of add values to that. So you have a very sort of loose way of specifying links that comes in sort of very handy when you're trying to build very dynamic pages with a lot of different content. And you can get the source from GitHub. Both QuarterMaster and the starter project are on GitHub. And the starter project is the one that we based the LeetCode site on. Okay, so when you actually go to use QuarterMaster, the tricky part at the moment is it's very dependent on web servers. And the one I use the most is Apache. QuarterMaster is designed to be used with generic web hosts, and Apache is the de facto standard. So you have to have mod rewrite, because QuarterMaster doesn't work with actual files. It intercepts any occasion where it doesn't find a file and will try and parse the path from there. Again, if the request doesn't match a file or a directory, it will redirect to the CGI script. QuarterMaster itself isn't the CGI script, it's called by the CGI script. It just passes on settings through the args. QuarterMaster, I tried to sort of keep it as just like a set of functions that are separate so that you can run multiple websites from one QuarterMaster installation. Oh, I do. This is the Sheam configuration. So it's the same idea. You're just trying to catch any instance where it doesn't find the file. So it's just, in this case, it just handles 404s. Okay, so also at the moment it requires a MySQL database if you're going to use a database. And that's just, again, MySQL is on a lot of web hosts. I'd like to make it more abstract, and part of the idea for that was building a spec that was schema neutral. I mean, it would be even better if it used an ad hoc database. I tried to start out with a database that was flat file, but it had too many limitations and just didn't want to go too far into building my own database, and it probably would benefit from just having a much more flexible database behind it. But until then, when this generates into the code that you need to build your database, this is just one table, and it sort of loosely maps that to MySQL types. Models generally wrap to database tables. Don't have to, they can be abstract objects, but generally they map to tables. You can include functions in addition to this that will apply to the table. So the object, when you load the model in, it converts each table to a port. So you can select records from the port. The easy way to do that is select port and the ID of the record you're looking for. You can also put in a block which would invoke a query. When you select a record from the port, it turns it into an object, and the object has everything that you would need to manipulate it and then store it. So you would just select something, maybe set a few different values, and then try and save it. And in most circumstances it would save it. If it can't save, if you put data that wouldn't validate case, it'll just say no. And you can go into the errors block in the record, and it'll say why. Forms use the validate syntax that I had earlier. So use a submit form and say submit new, and then it would try and validate against that specification. I added inherit, which means you can build one form on top of another. And again, when you invoke the submit command or function, it will tell you exactly why in the errors block if it fails, so that you can go back and show specifically to a user that submitted a form exactly why their data didn't, whatever they put in didn't work. So I'd love to add some metadata so that you can actually use these form objects to build HTML forms and just not have to worry about that part of HTML. Queries is just a way of wrapping SQL. It's the only place that I still actually have SQL in a QuarterMaster application, that you can create custom queries that allow you to, say, select the latest 10 blog posts. And yeah, you can change the sort order so that everything you get from the port when you select something, it's all in the format that you would want it, in the order you want it. You can even sort of filter out the records that you would want to. And I guess moving on to the views. Views, I use RSP, which is a very conservative choice. RSP is obviously very close to the HTML source, and I know that not everybody likes RSP. I have my own sort of special recipe for RSP, which includes things like if you use 2 equal signs, it will sanitize your text so that you don't have to worry about escaping values. It will do that for you just with that extra equals. And of course I have this exclamation point which invokes the match syntax, the time dialects, which is very useful, and it composes the dialect before you run it too. Controllers, so everything is organized into folders, and controllers is just a series of rebel files. each file corresponds to the URL portion of a request. So if you request recode.revault.org/attend, it will go to the attend controller and so on with the others. So a controller is a dialect. It starts with a Rebel header with type controller. And it's just a series of roots. And the root matches the next, the first part of the URL was the controller. The rest of the controller is split by path, and we try and match that in the parentheses. The first one, obviously, it matches if there's no extra path information, it will match the empty bracket. The home refers to the particular view you use, and the convention is basically the controller name matches the view folder containing the templates pertaining to that view. When you try and match the next parts of the roots, you do it with the as function. So it'll try and convert it to that type first, and then you can also add a little parse rule with some extra parse words that use some of the shortcuts I have for ident. I think it's just alphanumeric and underscore. So anything that doesn't match that, this root wouldn't match, and we just move on to the next one and try and match. Once we match, we can check here that somebody has the rights. So a user is just a record that was grabbed from the users table, and the record object has a moderator function which just checks to see if the data that the user has the moderator role. And the verify function is sort of a reverse case. If it doesn't match that, it will reject. And then we'll try again to select from the people database the person that we've matched in the root. And if we don't find that, then it's 404. And if we pass this block, then we check the HTML verb, and just that code gets executed. So you can include as many of the standard verbs as you like. I kind of played with the idea of any amount of custom verbs through simulation. I simulate put and delete by adding those to the query string for a post. So delete, any time you issue delete or put, it has to be post. So you can't accidentally delete something through a get request, once you have your verbs, you just perform your action. And I have 3 actions that you can do. One is render. And you can render strings. You can render a file. Will just render the file in the view folder relating to the controller that you have. You can use refinements to change obviously in this case, the MIME type. You can also change the status code. You can also set a template to use. There is another way to set the template, and that's to have it in the controller header. But you can also specify it here, and you can set that to none so that it just renders that. Redirect to just sends you off to a different page or a different site. You can use a URL file, or you can use a path, which will go through the path and try and calculate. You might be able to put custom values in there with parentheses, so it'll try and compose the path so that you can send somebody, if you create a new user, you can send them to their new ID. And the other one is print. I didn't put an example in here, but print just works the same way as print would work. In the console, you print a string, they'll print that as text. And I guess that's my little overview of QuarterMaster. There's a lot to do. I mean, that really is the essence of it. It's just a few very helpful functions that sort of add up to a very convenient language for developing sites. As I said, some of the future directions it needs to take, I need to update it so that it works with Rebel 3, and that would take it does work with UTF-8, but it would just remove some of the complications with the UTF-8. The database is obviously something that could be improved. Controllers, I'd like to, the idea is just to try and get as much done in as little vocabulary that really expresses what it is you're trying to do. Anything that I could do to make that even shorter would be of benefit. I mean, it's very much like a framework, a very loose framework that works, that I designed to work with Apache and shared web hosts. But I think if you were to take a lot of what I've done in my script and put it into, say, a module in Sheam, then you could reduce the amount of code that you're actually executing for each request and really have a very, very fast server that's very concise, very expressive. There's probably other things that I have in mind for it I can't think of right now, but does anybody have any questions?